So if I feel upset or anxious or happy, there must be something in the physical world that's causing it.
So Dr. Dicken is a licensed psychologist, retired, and currently works as a psychological educator. He specializes in the connection between the psychological and spiritual dimensions in life. He leads webinars, classes, and trainings in psychological well-being in countries all around the world. He also develops practitioners in what is called the 3 principles understanding, as discovered by Sydney Banks during a rare, spontaneous enlightenment experience. He's been married 53 years and has 2 amazing children and 4 adored grandchildren. So welcome.
Well, thanks, Tiffani. Thanks.
How are you doing today?
Fabulous. Really, really nice. It's cold, but it's sunny, blue sky and sunny here today, north of Seattle, right on the ocean.
Oh, that's awesome. My uncle actually lives out there and he loves it. He's got the ocean on one side and he has the mountains on the other side. And he adores living in Washington. So, it's interesting because you have had an incredible impact on my life. I became interested in changing my thinking at some point, realizing my thinking was the problem. And I kept trying to say affirmations and I kept reading books and I kept doing all sorts of things to try to be one of those positive thinkers. And the problem is I was still caught up in my head all the time, and I just was never enjoying life. And so I actually ran into you when I discovered the 3 principles. I started to look up 3 principles teachers, and I found you on YouTube. And I actually, of all the teachers that I learned from, I actually resonated with your teaching the most. I just found that you broke these principles down. These principles that bring us psychological well-being into a very relatable, understandable way that I could actually apply. Because I think when you're looking for psychological well-being, what you want most of all is peace of mind. And that's what I was searching for. And when I discovered the 3 principles, the whole concept made sense to me. Just a simple way of finding that peace of mind. But when I started to delve into some of the writings, especially Sydney Banks, it just kind of went, pew, and I just had trouble. So when I found your teachings, it just really made sense to me. So just tell the listeners a little bit about what are the 3 principles and how did you discover them in your work as a psychologist? I'm sure you were seeing lots of clients and patients. How did you happen to make your way into this sort of understanding?
Well, I became a psychologist about 45 years ago, if you can believe that. And I had been practicing for about 10 years. And I did what I often did was I was in a bookstore looking for the latest, greatest books. And I found one that I found quite interesting. It was different in a lot of ways than what I had been reading about psychology. And I got very interested and I looked at the back of the book and found out there was Institute in Tampa, Florida. And at that time I was living in Vermont. And I called them up and said, what do you folks do? And do you do trainings? And I went down for a 5-day training for professionals. And that was my very first exposure to what are called the three principles. And I found out while I was there, it was based on the realizations that happened to a man named Sydney Banks. Now, later, I spent many years studying with Sid. He's the most down-to-earth man I had ever met. He was a welder with a 9th grade education from Scotland, of all people. And he discovered what he, in an experience that many people would call an enlightenment experience. You know, people talk about near-death experiences a lot, and there's so many books written about them, where people go into a field of white light and they experience tremendous sense of connection to life and the universe. They feel a tremendous sense of love, and then they come back. And it was a near-death experience. It was like I started to die, but then I came back. I said, Sid, did you have a near-death experience? He said, no, I went all the way through. I actually had a death experience. And it was in that he realized that even though it doesn't appear to us as human beings that we're connected to the infinite field of energy that surrounds us, in truth and scientifically, we are. We're made of energy and we're connected to a field of energy. So Sid realized what he says are the most foundational forces that govern and create human psychological experience. Now, Tiffani, this is huge. Psychology had never had principles. When I came across Sydney Banks, Yale University counted up there were 450 different psychological theories.
Wow.
450 different theories, and there were no principles, no fundamental, unifying, universally accepted principles that were the creative governing forces that create every bit of human experience. And so here was Sid Banks, who said there are three universal forces at work to create our experience. The same universal forces that create babies, that create trees, that create everything in the visible world. Now scientists, the quantum physicists and the astrophysicists are saying, if you take everything that can be seen in the physical world, from the largest star to the smallest subatomic particle, and you measure the energy of that, it's only 4% of the energy in our universe.
Wow.
Tiffani, just imagine that your body is only 4% of who you really are. Because we're connected to this field of energy. So the metaphor that's been used for centuries, we're waves on an ocean, and we've thought that we were just individual separate waves because we didn't look down. We didn't realize we're connected to this infinite ocean that really is the foundation of who and what we are in truth. Right? So if you only look at the world as if the only thing that exists is the 4% of the visible, the physical, it's a very limited world. So if I feel upset or anxious or happy, there must be something in the physical world that's causing it. So for 200 years, psychology has looked for causes for human experience in the physical world.
And that was like, if I think about the concepts I learned, like as I was beginning to delve into the three principles, there's always that one thing that grabs you, and it's this profound truth that just your head explodes, And for me, it was the concept that at the core of who we are, we already possess perfect mental and emotional health, in the absence of being caught up in this world of thought. And that just blew my mind, and it made so much sense. And I had gone to, in the past when I struggled with anxiety, depression, and it was severe. At one point, I literally was agoraphobic. I would have panic attacks if I left my house. And I thought I was so broken and so defective. And I felt so hopeless that I'd go to therapy and I'd pay someone, $120, and I would talk to them for an hour, and I'd rehearse the same thought patterns over and over again, sort of kind of wiring them even further into the mind. And I wasn't getting any relief. And I had that fundamental core belief that the reason why I'm struggling is because something is wrong with me at my very core. And I developed that identity, that label of a person with a mental health issue. And so to hear that there's nothing actually wrong with me, and that's like one of the first things I tell my clients now, is that you actually possess perfect mental and emotional health. And they look at me like I literally told them, that I was from Martian, from outer space. And then once I explain that to them, it's this immense freedom just possesses that individual to believe, to understand that the problem is that I don't understand my relationship to thought, so just explain that a little more, because I think a lot of people, and I think maybe if I remember correctly, listening to you talk on YouTube, you noticed a profound difference when you started to apply these three principles to the clients and patients you were working with. And when people start to apply them to their life, often they make more progress in a single day than they have in 10 years of therapy. So talk a little bit on that and how this understanding is so transformative.
Well, it's nice that finally in the field of psychology, we can say there are universal fundamental principles. And those principles are universal mind. Every human being has a mind, but it's more than just our physical brain. We're connected to the intelligence built into this quantum field of energy that scientists talk about all the time now. That there's an intelligence that knows how to create and operate what's created in life. That's the principle of mind. We're connected to this formless intelligence that knows how to guide what's created through life. Right? Can't be damaged, can't be broken because it's formless. That's why we can say every human being is connected to an intelligence that's can create perfect well-being in a person. The second principle is the principle of consciousness, is that every human being, part of this field of formless spiritual energy, is what's called consciousness, that allows everything that's created to be aware. So it allows human beings to be aware of life. So I can see you, hear you, feel you. There's some power that's creating this potential within me to be aware of you and our conversation. And it's built into everybody. And the third principle is the power. Part of this formless energy is what's called the power of thought, that creates every bit of our mental activity so that we can have the experiences that we're having. So if a happy thought is created, you feel happy. If a sad thought is created, you feel sad. If an anxious thought is created, you feel anxious. And we can only, as human beings, feel what we're thinking. It doesn't come as we had been assuming without principles that somehow the world that was already created had the power to create feelings in us. And in truth, that's not true. There have been 600 research studies that have showed that adversity doesn't cause stress in people. Sometimes during stressful situations, people get very calm, often very calm, very present. Sometimes people get frightened. Well, that's understandable. If you have fearful thoughts, you're going to be frightened. And sometimes people get very compassionate. And even in the worst of situations, they'll do everything they can to save other people, even if it puts their own life at risk. So we can no longer say any circumstance has the power to create a feeling in people because it's not scientific. So I can go anywhere in the world, Tiffani, and go, you think, you're aware, so you can be aware that you think. You can be aware that you're connected to a deeper intelligence. You think, you're aware, and you have a mind that's capable of far greater things than you've ever realized. And I've had no argument about that anywhere I've gone in the world to teach these principles because they're not theories. People can disagree very easily with a theory, but I don't have people say, no, I don't think. It would be like saying, no, I don't breathe. I'm a human being, but I don't breathe. All right. I don't have any kind of mental activity created in me moment to moment. You see, no one argues with that because it's true. Now, you mentioned one of the most powerful things anybody can learn, and it was true for me too. I'd been a psychologist 10 years, and they said if you were struggling psychologically, you didn't have well-being. You'd have to work really hard, sometimes for years and years, to gain an ability to cope better with life, to gain well-being because you didn't have it. But that's not scientific. Scientifically, we're connected to this infinite field of life energy that's intelligent, that's aware, that's full of creative potential. And any human being can see evidence for that because when the thoughts that create our tension, stress, and upset quiet down, their thinking changes and they feel different because they have different thinking. So you take away the stressful, it's like changing the film in a movie. You take away the stressful thought movie, and you get a different movie shows up for people. That's why when people's heads clear, they quiet down, they start feeling more peaceful and feel better. And if they don't understand it, they'll think they feel better because of their situation, rather than any experience I'm having is being created through me via thought.
And that's what's so freeing about that, is because it's moving you from feeling like a victim, which is probably the most disempowering belief you could have, is I am a victim to all these circumstances without, and to realize that you actually create your own internal emotional responses by how you perceive and think about what's going on external. And I think it's interesting because you do meet people who are, you may see people like movie stars, for example, and they're the richest people in the world, and they've got all this attention and glamour. They could buy anything they want, go anywhere they want. They're the most beautiful people, and they're so miserable.
Yeah.
And then
I know I've worked with extremely financially successful people who are absolutely miserable because nothing in the outside world creates our happiness. It's built into us. But if we haven't learned that. Like I hadn't learned it. I was a psychologist for 10 years and I was still very anxious, a lot. And then I started learning. Maybe it'd be helpful if I told a little story, Tiffani.
Go right ahead.
I went to my very first training, and I'm a psychologist, and I think I know quite a bit of stuff. And now they start talking about 100% of our experiences coming from thought, and when our personal thinking quiets down, it's built into us to be peaceful, happy, and loving. It's built into us. And I'm skeptical. How could it be this easy? That every human being, well, we've never had principles before, and principles are the only thing that make things easy, because otherwise you have conflicting theories that are elaborate and everywhere. And so I was in my hotel room on the second night of my training, and I started thinking about a meeting that I had a week later. And before you know it, I'm sitting in this beautiful hotel room in Tampa, Florida, on a beautiful day, by myself, in a beautiful place. And I'm getting so anxious. It's unbelievable. And it was the first time in my life that I suddenly, in the moment, realized that I was feeling anxious because I was thinking about something that wasn't even happening in a way that created anxiety. And I started laughing. I said, I can't believe it. Here I am in this beautiful place all by myself, and I'm thinking about something that's not even happening, and it's creating all this anxiety. And when I stopped thinking about it, guess what happened to the anxiety? Poof, went away. And I said, I can't believe it. And then I started catching myself when I felt anxious going, oh, I'm holding on to thoughts that are creating anxiety. And I would just let go of everything I was thinking, come back to the present moment, and always, sometimes instantly, and sometimes it would take a little while, it just sort of fall away. It just
it's
sort
such
of
a beautiful message of truth and peace, because we are led to believe out there in the therapy world that your problems are incredibly complex and therefore they need a complex solution. And so when people come to see me and I tell them, most people only need a single session. And they look at me.
Go say what?
They go, what? They just can't hardly believe that. And it's really about getting these truths into the mind, because they really are truths. And when you hear them, it's like when, the people don't believe it, but when they actually hear them and they give it a little thought, that's like everybody kind of intrinsically knows that this is true.
Yeah.
You just know it's true.
It's interesting, isn't it? How far does the wave have to go to become the ocean?
It just is the ocean.
It's the same with human beings. How far does a human being have to go to be connected to the universal life energy that's wise, awake and aware, and full of creative potential? Nowhere. It's just a matter of having an insight or a realization about what already is true. So it's not a matter of you're broken and you're going to have to work hard to fix yourself. It's waking up to your innate well-being. Now, I've worked with people who have been labeled with every kind of psychiatric diagnosis you can imagine. I've worked with people who have spent their life in mental institutions. I've worked with people who have spent their lives in prison. I've worked with people who are in horrific circumstance, emotionally, physically, financially. And I've never found an exception to the fact that when a person head clears of all the negative thinking they're caught up in, that you don't see someone who is present, warm, kind, thoughtful, that I've found no exceptions to the fact that everybody has innate well-being. I'm working with a woman who had been depressed most of her life. And within 10 minutes in our session, we're both laughing our heads off. And I said, just mentioned to her, I said, right now you're not depressed, are you? She said, yes, I am. And because it's all innocent, Tiffani, we haven't been taught that we live in a world of thought from the moment we're born until we die, and that we're the thinkers. We haven't been taught that, although now I have friends all over the world going into schools teaching that to kids so that they can catch on to this at an early age, because it's so simple. Kids can catch on to it sometimes easier than adults, right? So now we're helping people realize you're a thinker. You innocently spend a lot of time holding on to thoughts that create your tension, stress, and upset. A friend of mine who is a psychiatrist, Dr. William Pettit, has estimated that depressed clients spend 85% of their day holding on to and thinking negative thoughts. And that when a depressed client begins to understand how thought creates their feelings, more and more they begin to let go of their thinking and live more fully in the present moment. It's only in the present that people can access their innate well-being. You can't think your way to it. You can't think your way to peace, to happiness, to love, to creativity. And so people begin to see, oh my gosh, I'm thinking all day long. And when I stop thinking and start resting in the present moment, I do start to feel a little more relaxed. I do start to feel a little less anxious. I do start to lighten up. And that's the beginning of a life turning around and beginning to access more and more that innate well-being.
When you think about it, this present moment is really all we have, and yet people will spend their entire life, some of them, looking back on the past and just thinking these same thought patterns and regretting the past, rehearsing trauma, or they'll be looking towards the future and they're worrying about what might happen, in the future, and they have trouble dealing with that uncertainty. And they're missing out on the only real life, which is right now in the present moment. And they're missing out on that innate peace that they already have that they don't even know they possess. It's like being a millionaire and not realizing it. No one told you there's $1 million in the bank account. It's been there all along while you're living in poverty. And it's there for the taking, for the use.
One of the favorite things I learned from Sid Banks, he ended up being my mentor for 23 years before he died. And I didn't learn anything from him. I learned everything from where he pointed me within myself where I could access my well-being and wisdom. And he was so confident that every human being is, whether they know it or not, connected to these universal life energies. You couldn't convince him otherwise because he realized the truth of that directly. All right? He could not be convinced that we're not at core healthy, wise, awake, creative potential. Couldn't convince him that because he saw that those are not theories. That's truth. There is an intelligence that knows how to grow a flower, and then it knows how to turn it toward the sun, and it knows how to take that sunlight and photosynthesize it into energy for its own growth. I mean, it's like, and human beings, I've witnessed the birth of 2 kids and 2 grandkids, 2 of my grandkids being at the birth, and watching them come into the world and already being thinkers and awake and aware and responding to life, and then watching them continue to grow and change, and they have everything they need built into them to live a good life. But without understanding, it's people, as they get older, will innocently start getting more and more caught up in thinking that creates tension, stress, or upset. And if they don't understand that they're the thinker, they'll innocently blame. The traffic is upsetting me. What you just said hurt my feelings. This sun came out today and made me feel better. Someone said, well, the sun was out yesterday and you were miserable. Why didn't it make you feel better yesterday? Because the outside world doesn't create our feelings. They're created by the power of creation. The power of thought creates our mental activity.
So now I'm sure you've been observing that, anxiety and depression is something that's existed throughout human history. But lately, it's been in the news. It's been the topic of discussion so much that anxiety and depression is rapidly rising amongst young adults today, particularly teenagers and the early 20s. What do you think? I mean, what's changing? What's going on? That I think it's about a 58% increase as it stands now in anxiety and depression. And I'm certainly seeing an influx of these young clients.
Well, I agree with you, first of all. And one thing that's helpful to understand is innocently we start spending more and more time thinking and using our minds in a way that creates tension. Nobody likes to live in tension. It's uncomfortable. So everybody is trying to solve the problem of tension in their life. Now, without understanding, tension is a temporary creation by my own thinking, and in the quiet underneath my thinking, there is no tension. And if I rest in that quiet, that space, not only will I be free of tension, but I'll start to feel even better. And without that understanding, when people feel tension and they want to solve it, which everybody does, they'll look for something in their life that when they do it, they feel better. So you can totally understand a young person getting insecure. Am I pretty enough? Am I fast enough? Am I cool enough? Am I going to be liked? Are people going to like me? And before you know it, they start spending a lot of time thinking in a way that makes them more insecure. And then they look for something that when they do, they feel better. So you watch a movie on TV, you feel better. You go on TikTok and start scrolling and you see all kinds of entertaining things. But the whole time you're on the screen, you're thinking about what you're seeing. So you're spending more and more time thinking. And remember, it's when our minds quiet down that our well-being naturally arises. So if I took any human being on this planet and made them think about anything, it could even be positive, and I wouldn't let them stop, after a while they'd be begging me to stop. Because you can't feel happiness while you're thinking. You'll get a temporary experience of positive thought. But it's when both positive and negative thinking quiet down that true happiness arises that's unconditional.
Mm.
But people don't know where to look for their well-being, so they keep looking outside. So money, food, sex, distractions, diversions, stimulation can...
Oh. The water went down the wrong way.
Oh, I know. Hate that
Okay,
one.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So money, food, sex, distractions, people, computers, programs, the internet, spending more and more time looking for well-being on the outside. But the good news is when we go into schools and teach the principles, they start knowing where their insecurity comes from so that they're not labeling themselves, I'm an insecure person, what's wrong with me, I'm not as good as somebody else. They start seeing the role thought plays in creating their insecurity, and they start doing less and less thinking that creates insecurity. Now that's a gift for any human being. It changed my life when I learned that one, right? And to watch kids begin to understand better, well, I'm a thinker. And why would I keep thinking about this if it makes me feel insecure or anxious? And when I don't think about it, it doesn't even exist because it's not being created. And then they found out when my head clears, I have happiness and peace and love inside of me. And if I access that and bring it to other people, I get more and more of it. And I watch kids who were crippled with social insecurity and anxiety suddenly thriving because they're seeing themselves as a thinker who has perfect well-being inside. They're discovering the truth of that.
I think that's the message that kids are being sent increasingly, is that your happiness is external. This is what the media, advertising, marketing, and I think that's why it's increasing. And in just my opinion, I've wondered about this, is because the message is increasing that your happiness is directly dependent on whether you have this car, this appreciation, these friends, this face, this body. And that's what they're looking towards in an unprecedented, amount that really wasn't something people really thought as much about in previous generations. And that's why the depression and anxiety, the more we look to the external to make us happy,
so true,
the less happy we're going to be.
So true. And you have to understand the innocence of this, that for 200 years, the paradigm that was generally understood by people in the world was that the outside world makes you feel bad and the outside world makes you feel good.
Yeah.
So of course, people will be innocently blaming the outside world for their tension, stress, and upset. I did. Everybody I knew does or did, until you begin to learn stress doesn't come from the outside world, it's created by our thinking. And that when our thinking quiets down, the stress goes away because it doesn't have an independent existence. It's like a movie. What's on the screen in a movie theater is only there because it's on the film or the digital device. But if it's not on the film or the digital device, it's not going to be on the screen.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is such an important message now. I mean, it always is, but it's so profound to people because right now, I mean, every time you turn on the news, there's another danger that's about ready to devour you and the earth and society and culture. And it seems like the more media people are exposed to, the more negative input and the more that message is being, given to them that, the world's about to end. And here's a million reasons why. The world's a terrible place. People are bad. Everything's horrible. And your focus just becomes increasingly external, and thinking, I've got to solve all these problems. Or, I've heard so many young people come in and sit in my office and they'll say, well, what's the point? The world's not even going to be around in 2050. We're all going to be extinct and climate change is going to destroy the earth. And they're so focused on the problems and so focused external that they don't really see that if we all as collectively change internally, what a different world it would be. And, mankind has struggled to solve the problem of human evil for so long. And it's not because humans are actually evil. It's because they don't realize who they really are. They don't realize that they are connected. And, it sort of stems out of this sort of thinking and belief system that, I'm defective, I'm broken, I'm this label and that label. And then as a result, those internal beliefs and labels end up expressing themselves externally in behaviors that aren't really conducive to either our health or the health of our culture or society at large, And it just,
we've never had the answer to human problems. There's one human problem is people get caught up in thought that's painful. They think the content of that thinking is true, and then they live a life on the basis of that. That's how they act and behave based on that view of life. That's the one problem. You show me anybody who's having difficulty or suffering psychologically, I can guarantee you they're caught up in a lot of negative thinking, sometimes about themselves, sometimes about the world, sometimes about other people, and they're holding on to that thinking that makes them feel horrible, and then they blame the world for why they feel that way. And it's innocent. Again, I can't emphasize enough, you can't blame somebody for not having learned how something works if they're not able to use it well. If you give a 5-year-old a computer to use and they can't figure out how to use it and they keep losing things and deleting things, and you don't blame them. They just haven't learned what they need to learn yet. But now we know what it is that if people learn, it can help them, first of all, solve the one human problem is I feel uncomfortable or bad, and I'm trying to resolve that. But if you don't understand that it's thought created, it's almost impossible to resolve it. So there's one problem and there's one cure psychologically, is that people can wake up out of any thinking that weighs heavily on them, rest in the present moment, and be filled with feelings of well-being that then we can bring into the world. And it's the only way we can create a better world. So every human being, no exception, has the capacity to help bring more love and compassion into the world. Every human being. Every human being.
Beautiful truth, and it's so simple. And I think that's sort of the blockage many people have in their minds, is that continued belief that there has to be a complex solution for what they perceive as a complex problem. But the problem is simple, and the solution is simple. And if there's anything we need in a society that's, everything's there's sort of a hyper novelty and an increasing complexity as far as many of the things external to us, to really know that despite all that, the answers to our well-being are simple. We actually already possess it. And it's such a beautiful truth. Now, the one question I have, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought of a great story.
Oh, do tell.
It's a really good example of how someone who is hopeless and anxious could have insights that turned it completely around, and how that becomes a story for any of us who do a lot of imagining and thinking about a future that doesn't even exist and get more and more anxious. I get a call from a mother that I had done some sessions with, and she said, my daughter is having real difficulty. She's 10 years old, and she gets so anxious she can't even function in school. She can't function. She can't do anything. She gets overwhelmed with anxiety. And the school has called me up and said, you have to take your daughter out of school and get her into full-time therapy, and you have to maybe put her into a school for kids who need special help psychologically. And she said, Dicken, I know that if she learns what I learned, this could all turn around. Would you talk to her? And I said, yeah, I'd be glad to. Right? So we set up a time when I could meet her daughter. And we had to do it on Zoom because she was in Europe. Right? And there's the mom sitting there on Zoom. And I start, oh, hi, good to see you. We started talking. I said, is your daughter going to join us? And she points behind her back. And her daughter was crouched down behind her on the sofa, hiding behind her mom. Kids aren't stupid. She's listening to my tone of voice to hear whether there's judgment in it. Mm. Kids can tell if an adult is safe. Kids could walk into my office and they could instantly tell, almost before I said anything, if I saw them as damaged goods and broken, or if I saw them as beautiful, wonderful, whole human beings who had just gotten caught up in some thinking innocently. Kids can tell. They'll listen to a tone of voice. And then they like to look at your eyes. So your eyes are the windows to your soul. So after a while of talking to mom, her head peeks up just enough for her eyes to peek over her mom's shoulder so she could look into my eyes. And I went, oh, hi, you must be Sarah. Hi, Sarah. It's good to see you. And I started talking to Sarah now. And I said, Sarah, how old are you? And I'll bet you have a really cool room. I don't know why. It just occurred to me to ask her about her room. I said, what's your favorite thing in your room? And pretty soon she's telling me unicorns. I have stuffed unicorns. I love unicorns. We talked about unicorns for 20 minutes, Tiffani. And she's getting more and more. You could see her anxious, upset thinking quieting down. And she just was like, as kids are and can be when their head's clear, just bubbling, enthusiastic, funny, warm, kind. Her well-being was just flooding out. And I was determined not to go longer than half an hour total. So with about 5 minutes to go, I started saying, have you noticed how while we've been talking, you haven't been feeling anxious? Do you know why that is? Your thinking changed. You let go of all your worried thinking. And then naturally your well-being is coming out because it's inside of you. And I said, very few people, even adults, understand that their feelings are created from their thinking, but it's true for every one of us. Now, that literally, Tiffani, is about how long I talked with her about that. He said, oh, well, it's been great talking to you. And she wanted to talk again. She liked the session. She found out I was a safe adult who wasn't judging her, who was enthusiastic about her health And so we set up a time to talk again, and not too long away. And I get an email from her mom. And she said her daughter came downstairs the next morning and said, Mom, every person has a thought factory inside of them and is creating thoughts all day long. And that's why we all feel different things. Now, I did not talk about a factory. That was her insight into what's true. We're thinkers. So in our next session, we had another great session. I found out more about unicorns than you can ever imagine. It was so cool. You touch a unicorn's horn and colorful butterflies fly out of it. I mean, how cool can you get, And in the second session, she says, Dicken, who runs the factory?
Oh, what a good question, huh?
You see, she's starting to understand there's a source to experience. And I said, well, you're the thinker, so you're the manager of the company. You're the thinker. And she goes, yeah, everybody is the manager of their factory, and people don't know it, though. I mean, the wisdom coming out of this girl. I'm the student now. I'm getting hit by this. I'm sharing with my clients, hey, you want to know about the thought factory? And then the last session, our third half-hour session, she says, Dick, I have one more question for you. If I run the factory, who created the factory? Now, you can't explain the creative nature of the infinite formless field of spiritual energy. But we talked about it a little bit to her satisfaction. In other words, she was intuiting a new paradigm that's inside out. There's a formless source to life rather than the outside in paradigm as anything in experience is created by something that's already been created, which is not true. There's no science behind that to verify that. You get 10 people in a horrific situation, everybody will have a different experience. Why? Because everybody has their own thinking. And when our thinking changes, our feelings change. And to learn that is powerful. That if you let go of the old, wisdom will bring you new and fresh thinking. Right?
Yeah, it's
so
amazingly.
I get a call from the mom and from the school saying she's back in school. She's doing fabulous. Her anxiety is no longer keeping her from being able to participate fully in class. She seems to be enjoying herself now. And that stuck. You can't undo those kind of insights. You can forget information, but you can't undo insights. You learn how to ride a bike, and then you don't ride it for 10 years. You can get right back on it and pick up where you left off. That's the power of insight.
And I wonder how many other kids in that school learned about the thought factory, because she
very
shared
interesting.
that insight with other people.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of them caught on. And it's interesting working with young people because you could change the entire trajectory of their life when they get
the entire trajectory.
Principles. Yeah.
So true, Tiffani. So true.
Yeah, and I could see, this even how I think the most difficult experience is grief that people go through. when they lose a loved one, and
Yeah.
just kind of dive into that a little bit on how this can help someone to get through even those really tragic times in life.
It's very understandable that, every human being I know has, during the day, they have a change in their mood.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. That's natural. It's part of a physical cycle is like you have the inhale and you have the exhale. Psychologically, you have an inhale and you have uplifting thoughts come through you. Then you have a low mood. It's like the psychological exhale. Now, if you understand how all this works, when you have a low mood, you don't grab onto those thoughts that tend to be more judgmental, more negative. You don't grab onto those thoughts and keep thinking about them. And if you don't, you'll get over your low mood very quickly. Like really little kids have enormous resilience because they don't think about their low mood thinking. They don't analyze when they're in a low mood. As we get older, we start doing that more and more. So it's understandable, isn't it, Tiffani, how any of us innocently could start grabbing on to a low mood thought. Oh, I'm stupid. Oh, this is horrible. Oh, I'm never going to be able to figure this out or deal with this, or that person has hurt my feelings and now I'm damaged. It's so easy for any of us to draw a conclusion about ourselves or about life from a low mood thought. And if you do that consistently, your thinking becomes more and more negative, and you become more and more convinced that what you're thinking is true. I am stupid. I am damaged. There is something wrong with me. People don't like me. I can't do this well. On and on and on. There's just no end to what we can fabricate about ourselves. And if a person spends an awful lot of time holding on to negative thought and thinking negative thought, thinking insecure thoughts are true, they'll become every thought we now know changes our biochemistry. So if you continue to have negative thought upon negative thought, you're innocently changing your biochemistry. So biochemistry is not the source of depression. It's the result of the thinking we're doing moment to moment all day long. And now they're really able to show scientifically that that's true. That you start thinking about something really negative and it changes your heart rhythm. You start producing different chemicals in your body. It's very quick. And if you do that for long periods of time, that's what we would call depression.
I think the best example of that is when, and everyone's had this experience, you go outside and you see that garden hose and you think it's a snake. It's not a snake, but you thought I'm having an encounter with a snake, and instantly your heart starts racing and you feel nervous. And it's not until you come to that place of truth, you realize, oh, it's just a garden hose. And then you calm down. And that's a perfect example of that physiological, biochemical changes occurring because of a thought. Or you think back on a conversation you have, you think, oh, I embarrassed myself. And you can look in the mirror and see that you'll have that facial flushing, you'll turn red in an embarrassing moment just from the thought that I embarrassed myself. So we understand that, on that small level, but, living in a state of constant anxious thought, constant depressed thought, constant insecure thought, it's taxing and stressful to our systems. We're not supposed to live that way. Yeah.
Takes a toll. I started, when I started learning these principles 35 years ago, I worked a lot with people who had anxiety attacks. And people who have anxiety attack tend to be people who do a lot of anxious future thinking, so that their body is already flooded with a lot of adrenaline kind of chemicals. And then they have one thought come in that creates a sudden burst of adrenaline. Now, one psychologist did a research and found out that every human being has times during a day when you have a thought that creates a sort of a startle, a loud noise, somebody sneaking up on you, somebody goes boo, somebody, you're watching a movie on TV and something jumps out, and one thought can flood you with adrenaline. Now, if that happens and you don't know, you can't find anything outside of you that you think could cause it. Let's say you're just walking down the street and you have one of these fearful thoughts. Oh God, I might start having anxiety here and not be able to get home. And then, as a lot of research is showing, it's not that first wave of fearful thoughts. You can watch a scary movie and have thoughts that flood you with adrenaline. This scary movie, I don't want to watch it. Or some people go, I love watching it because I love getting freaked out and knowing I'm still okay. I can walk out and have pizza with my friends, Doesn't mean I'm crazy, right? Now, if this happens to you and you can't explain it, you don't know, well, any thought can create strong emotion. You'll start having thoughts, what's wrong with me? Oh no, here it goes again. This can't be happening. I don't want this to be happening. See, more and more fearful thoughts, which create more adrenaline.
That's interesting, because that's the exact concepts that I give to clients who have panic attacks. And I'd say about 90% of them will never have a panic attack again after they understand that we all have these primary fears and drivers and thoughts, and that will bump us up. And then when you experience these raised in cortisol, that's when they add second fear. That's what I call it. They begin to fear the way they feel. They fear the anxiety itself. They fear maybe a panic attack's going to occur.
It's just more thinking, isn't it? It's just more. Yep. You just keep feeding the anxiety with more and more anxious thinking, more and more
and it's
fearful.
That fear of the physical symptoms and the way I feel, and the thinking about the symptoms and the way I feel, that actually begins to push that up higher, creating more physical
even
symptoms.
More. Innocently.
And that pushes up higher until eventually the nervous system just goes, and if you don't add the additional thought process, that second fear, the panic attack absolutely cannot occur. And it's so simple. And yet I get people coming to my office and they have literally been in therapy and taking meds for 5 years and no one's ever told them this. And I'm just sad, not because I think I'm this repository of wisdom. I'm very thankful to have learned these myself. That's how I beat my own panic attacks years ago. But I think, wow, it's so simple, and why yet are people being told and taught these simple principles?
I was asked once to come into a hospital and do a training for all the physicians working in the emergency room, because they didn't know how to treat effectively panic attacks. Other than saying you have a severe psychological problem, you got to go into therapy and find out what in your past causes you to have these kind of reactions, which is now we can see is not going to be necessarily helpful for people. And they didn't know how to deal with it, other than just saying, well, here's some medication that'll help you calm down, but it doesn't solve the problem. Like you said, fear of your own fearful experience becomes an enormous problem. And once you realize it's just thought, There's nothing wrong with you. You're just experiencing your thinking. And if you play a fearful movie at the movie theater, that's going to be the movie that people see. That's it. But if you stop playing it, pretty soon it just loses steam and peters out. And like anything else, that's how people get over painful memories, is they stop giving attention to them. So fear will still come up at times. It does for me. Oh man, I can get startled easily. But I don't think into it like I used to.
Yeah.
I do the best I can to come back to the present moment, go about my day, knowing that it's a little thought storm that'll pass once I have my attention off of it.
Yeah.
It always has passed. It's always passed. At some point, people stop thinking about that and they start to feel better.
And I think people believe that they have to think and analyze, particularly the future, because they try to do that in an effort to make themselves feel safe. You know, if I could just figure out everything that's going to happen and how I'm going to deal with it. And then you start applying that to bigger world problems, you know, geez, there's people starving. Geez, there's climate change. Wow, there's racial tension. You know, you could completely overwhelm yourself with the analysis of all this stuff in the future. But what we don't realize is when we have that peace, when we tap into that innate peace, we actually free our creativity so that we can actually become part of the solution. But when we're caught up in all that mental angst, we don't have the energy. There's nothing more draining than living in a chronic state of anxiety or depression. And it just drains you of the energy that you need to actually create any kind of positive change. So when you are in that present moment, living in that state of peace, it's like this world opens up and you suddenly have ideas and wisdom on how to be a part of the solution to the actual problems that were causing you anxiety at one point to begin with. You have clarity of thought.
Here's a metaphor that points toward the way we're always connected to this field of energy. Right? Every human being is connected to this same field of energy. We're human, which is our physical beings, and the being part of us is pointing toward what people intuit to be true is we're connected to life. We're not independent of life. We're part of life the way a wave is part of an ocean. And one time in a very quiet moment, I had this insight. We're all connected on that deeper level, and it's like an ecosystem. And as people let go of their fearful thinking and quiet down, they literally are bringing more love and wisdom into the world, literally. And that's improving this part of the ecosystem. But because it's all one system, what I learned in college years ago was if any part of an ecosystem becomes healthier, the whole system is becoming healthier because it's all interconnected.
And I hadn't even thought about that. So that is a really interesting point.
So any one of us can help raise the overall level of well-being of humanity. How? By quieting down. Sid would say, if you want to find well-being or your spiritual nature or your true self or your connection to life, there's only one thing you have to do in order to find that connection is let go of everything periodically, let go of everything you're thinking and rest deeper and deeper into the presence that's always here underneath all your thinking. And in that quiet space that you're resting, which people call presence, as you're resting in your presence, or sometimes people call it your soul, pure consciousness, when you're resting in that space, this deeper intelligence will raise you up to a higher level of consciousness, to a higher level of, you begin to feel better and love more. And you become kinder and warmer. And you bring that into a world, and it affects people around you. It does. It'll affect your... When I started doing this, it affected my kids and my wife. I stopped blaming them for my upset, and I started quieting down more and bringing more calmness into the family instead of more anxiety and upset. And it affected the system. It does. It affected the system. And then I learned from Sid Banks, because we're all connected on a universal level too, it not only affects the people around you, it affects the whole system.
Yeah, I've heard a term used. I think it was Rick Sheldrake, if you're familiar with him. They use the term morphic resonance. I haven't delved too deeply into that,
Yeah.
but and they've done some
pointing
research
toward that. It's pointing toward that there's a deeper way in which life is connected.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to me, because they couldn't figure out for years how, as an entire flock of birds is flying, and then there's that bird in the lead, and then the entire flock just whoosh, all at once, and they'll shift directions. And so the scientists are asking themselves, are they watching the bird in the front, and then it's sort of cascading back? But when now with these modern cameras, they down to the second, no, they were turning, boom, the exact same second, and that became known as morphic resonance. And and if you apply that on a broader range, I think another thing I had heard was how if you give rats a certain poison, the companies will come up with a new pesticide for rats, a new rat poison. And so if you give that to them in America, they learn not to eat that specific poison. What they couldn't figure out is, why then did rats in Europe also stop eating that poison? So there's this weird, it's not weird, but there's this beautiful collective knowledge that we seem to share that we're not even aware of. And I think this is why we see so many patterns that begin in one place seem to just outbreak in another place, and we don't even understand. It doesn't seem to be a connection.
I just see over and again in couples and in families and in communities that as one person becomes lighter and less fearful, more open, more loving, more kinder, more creative, like you said, it starts affecting everybody around them over time. You literally are helping to create a healthier system in your relationships, and then in your community, and then in the world, and ultimately in the universe. It's such a hopeful message that you already have everything you need to have well-being. And the only thing that covers it over is a misunderstanding about thought. And as you begin to uncover your well-being and see the benefit of quieting down, you'll start naturally beginning to tap into not only better feeling, but when people feel better, they become wiser. When people feel better, they have so much more what we call common sense. Common sense is new and fresh thinking that helps guide us toward what makes sense in this moment. So I would tell kids that I would work with, if you can understand that your feelings are created by thought, you'll start letting go of tons of your thinking. You'll just let go of more and more and more. You'll catch yourself thinking up tension, stress, upset, and you'll drop it more and more of the time. And then you'll notice that you start feeling better whenever you do that. And then you notice when you feel better, you do better at anything, a sport, a problem, a relationship, anything, dealing with your parents, anything.
Yeah, my son said to me not too long back, he got in a car accident. He developed a fear of driving that was very physiological. Like he'd get in the car and throw up and all sorts of stuff. And so, I do hypnosis. We did some hypnosis. He was doing really good, but then he said, I realized from this experience that I had some other anxieties as well. And then I asked him just a couple of days ago, I said, how's it going? You doing okay with anxiety? He goes, well, if I just don't think anxious thoughts, I don't get anxious. And I'm like, there you go, son. There you go.
Whoa. See,
It's just,
I want every person in the world to start understanding we're all thinkers. We all think. We all get to use that beautiful gift either wisely or unwisely. We're all connected on a deeper level to this field of consciousness so that we can live at higher and higher levels of consciousness. And we are all connected to this deeper intelligence, and that comes through us as wisdom and common sense.
and I think it's important, first of all, too, because I've had clients say to me, well, I can't stop thinking negative thoughts. And they don't realize that they actually can stop thinking negative thoughts. That when they tell themselves they can't, it's that thought that I can't that actually is the only thing keeping them from being able to drop down into that present moment, is that belief,
A while back, I started telling you, Tiffany, I don't know if I ever finished it. One of the most beautiful parts of Sid's teaching was every human being is a thought away from the present moment, whether they know it or not. I've had tons of people say it's so hard to be present. I say, okay, just listen and I'll tell you the secret. And they go, okay. And they immediately become present because you can't listen and think at the same time.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's so funny.
And then they're present. But you have to see there's benefits to being present. You don't become stupid. You don't become dumb. You don't not care. You don't deal with things. Why is that? Because of the principle of mind. This intelligence, then, when you're present, will literally guide you toward being more loving and kind in the world.
Yeah.
Literally.
It's not about becoming apathetic like so many people think. I'm going to be apathetic and not care because I'm living in my own selfish world, and it's not that at all.
When I played sports, I saw that when my head was clear and I was fully present, I didn't have to think about what to do. I just knew. It's called being in the zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't become apathetic and passive when my head was clear. I became clear and creatively responsive to whatever was happening at the time.
Yep.
And I'm going, wow, but I didn't know that was also true off the field.
Mm.
I didn't know that's always available to us, that kind of intuitive knowing where to go and how to do stuff is built into us. I didn't know that. No one had told me that until I met Sid Banks. He says, you're not different than anybody else. You're as connected to wisdom as any other human being on this planet is. You just haven't realized that that's true.
And that takes away that belief that so many people are really struggling. They'll come in for therapy or counseling, and they have this thought in their mind that I am hopelessly defective. I've had so much trauma. I've had so many traumas. There's so many external things that have caused me to be this broken, damaged person. And just to be set free from that and no, you actually have agency. Yeah. You have agency to bring yourself to a place of peace because it's already there. And that is just an amazing level of freedom. And it's so simple, and it doesn't take years and years and years of therapy to get there.
Sure it doesn't.
To experience that peace.
We're thought away from our well-being at all times, right? I've seen people just in the worst place ever, and then their best friend comes into the room and they go, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" And immediately they let go of the old, and their well-being comes right to the surface. The clouds part, the sun is right there waiting to come through.
Yeah.
Well, Tiffany, this has been enjoyable. Thanks for having me talk to you about this stuff.
It's been absolutely great having you. And there's just been so much wisdom, such a simple wisdom, but nevertheless so incredibly powerful. So it's been my pleasure And so tell people if they want to learn more about the three principles, they want to learn more about how to find.
Yeah, there's, if you want to hear from the guy who sort of discovered this, there's a new Sydney Banks YouTube channel that has every one of the talks and videos available of Sid available for free to people at Sydney Banks / at Sydney Banks 3.
Okay.
In YouTube. And then there's an organization I'm part of called Three Principles Global Community. And we're now creating a new level of membership for anybody, whether they want to be a practitioner or not. So we have 3 levels for practitioner, apprentice practitioner, and now we're creating a community member category. So excited. That'll be very soon, but you can look at the 3PGC Global Community, 3pgc.com. Is it com or org? Oh, geez. It's one of those. I think
I will validate and put down in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So and then I have a YouTube channel that has lots more of these kind of talks if they're helpful. So those are 3 really great resources.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Dicken. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Tiffani. Thanks for having me, honestly. And I love what you're doing and what a service to your listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of A Transformed Life podcast. I hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and entertaining. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast so you never miss out on future episodes. I cover a variety of topics to help you transform your mind, health, and relationships. If you found this episode helpful or entertaining, please take a moment to leave me a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me to reach more listeners who could benefit from this content. Lastly, I love hearing from my listeners, so please reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, and even TikTok with your thoughts, feedback, or ideas for future episodes. Your input helps me to make better content and build a community around this podcast. So thank you again for tuning in, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.